All right. First of all, for all the people who come to my channel for filmmaking stuff, let me just get this out of the way. First of all, I'm shooting in the natural profile, which I never do. I always shoot in Vlog. I'm shooting in 1080, which I never do. I always shoot 4K or Cinema 4K. I'm using a Panasonic S5. I'm using a purple Panda lavalier mic. I'm using a Zoom H1N audio recorder. You know, this is not really a filmmaking video today. So it's relevant to my filmmaking for sure. But if you're just into technical stuff or anamorphic lenses and, you know, stuff that I talk about, this is not the video for you. This video is really for the adoption community in my life. The people who have come out of either foster care or adoption or both. And I want to talk about the journey that I've experienced over the last 17 years of my creative practice, my artistic life, you know, which is my whole life, which is I've, you know, gotten up in the morning and worked all day on my plays or my films, and it's been all based on my search for my biological beginnings for the last 17 years, except for one 5-year period where I worked on a play called Brooklyn Quartet, which had nothing to do with any of this. But during the 17 years, I've been working on a trilogy. My first play was called Broke Wide Open, and it was about my very ambivalent search for my biological mother. And I'm not going to get into all this stuff. I really want to talk about something specific today because I saw something last night that kind of triggered me in a way. And it made me want to make this video and target it towards the adoption community because I don't really communicate with them directly usually. And they actually found me 17 years ago. And I have had a very kind of controversial relationship with them, to say the least. You know, a lot of people feel different ways about me. I mean, I've had people say things to me like, I hope you get cancer and die, or, you know, I'll pay you $1,500 to change the end of your play because I said nice things about my adoptive family. But then again, I've had some of the most supportive people come into my life from the adoption community as well, the most beautiful, you know, positive people as well. So it's been both sides. It's been a very interesting journey, to say the least, because I didn't even know I was writing a play initially about adoption. I thought I was just writing something about my life. But I guess my life in many ways has been defined by the fact that I was adopted, that I came out of foster care, that I lived in 3 foster homes as a baby before I was even, you know, finally fostered by my parents for 1.5 years and then ultimately adopted. And I feel very fortunate for that fact. And, you know, both of my parents are gone. They passed away. And I found out that my biological mother passed away actually 2 months after my adoptive mother passed away, which is pretty weird. So what I want to talk about is, you know, I wrote a play, I started working on this in 2007. It was an album first, and it became a play. Wound up doing it for 6 years all over the world. You know, wound up off Broadway. It was an amazing experience. I had a fundraiser called 500 Names. I got over almost 700 people to contribute to my initial ability to be able to put the play up off Broadway. So they were, in a sense, my producers. Well, not in a sense, they were literally my producers, and they knew it. And it was the most magnificent experience of my life. I mean, I can't describe what that was like, you know. I developed that play in the streets and in parks, and I rehearsed in front of people all the time. I actually developed the play in front of audiences all the time. And so it went from the streets to the parks to abandoned storefronts to, you know, abandoned gas stations and art galleries and, you know, to off-Broadway. And I wound up doing 8 shows a week for almost 6 months. And along the way, I learned a lot. You know, I learned about the adoption community, that it is a community, that there are people who need one another to kind of work things out because, you know, it is a complicated kind of existence. You know, it's like you have to navigate it well to be able to have a happy, healthy life, you know? And I am somebody who did not navigate it very well at times, and I had a pretty poor relationship with my parents when I was growing up, and with many people. You know, I didn't have a lot of friends really. You know, I think, you know, I had people. You know, I was a good athlete, so if I wasn't a good athlete, I would have had no friends. Like, I just had friends who were people on my teams or kids who I played ball with or whatever, but I didn't have anybody who I really talked to, except for one person, and he passed away way too young. My friend Gene Giles. He was the only person that I was able to really talk about my adoption and my creative side, because everybody thought I was just this jock. You know, I was a good athlete, but you know, I had real meaningful conversations with him over the years. And it wasn't until I went to college where I really started to have more relationships with people who I felt knew me a little bit better, but still, I was a very solitary kind of person. And even if you were close to me, I don't know if you really knew me all that well, unless you asked, you know, because I didn't offer much about this, especially because this part of my life was something that I didn't even know how to work out in my head. So I didn't talk to anybody about it unless I knew that they had been in the same circumstance as me. And even then, I wasn't very open about it, you know. And I tell people often that theater actually saved my life, because, you know, theater kind of opened the door to me dealing with this in a more serious way. And I have to thank my first director, Stephen Bishop Seeley, because the first time I tried to write a play, it was like 4.5 hours long, and it was about everything in life. Like, everything that I thought about was in this play. And the first time he came to see me perform it, he was like, "This is awesome. I mean, it's really great, but it's like 19 plays. Like, you have to choose one thing." And he said, "I think you should choose this thing with your mother, your biological mother, your adoptive family. Like, that's cool." And so that kind of started me on that journey. And but I was ambivalent about it at that time. Like, I wasn't sure I wanted to go down that way, but I knew there was something about it that I knew I had to do, you know, I had to deal with. And so I started on that journey. And at first, like I said, it was very ambivalent. The play was kind of like a yellow brick road of me finding what home meant to me. Like, I was searching for home, you know, and because I never felt comfortable anywhere, you know, with anybody. I never felt like I was a part of anybody or anything. Like, I always just felt like me, which is a good thing and a bad thing. And I always had this feeling of like being kind of invisible to people. Like, they didn't really know me, but I think part of that is because I wasn't willing to offer much, you know. Like, I would talk about deep, heavy things, but usually those deep, heavy things were like racism. You know, I was like consumed with racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny and things like that. Like, I became like a social justice warrior. And I think part of it was because I was maybe staying away from me, you know, like, none of it really had anything to do with me, although I am Jewish, you know, and I am a human being, but, you know, I don't consider myself oppressed, you know, and I always took up for the oppressed, for people who were being treated like crap, you know, for things that were unfair. And I think in many ways I was avoiding my own life, my own self. So I wrote Broke Wide Open, and then I wrote a second play because after I finished working on that project that I was talking about that kind of took me away from this trilogy, Brooklyn Quartet, which was based on the Sean Bell shooting of 2006, which you could Google that, but Sean Bell was like the first name of young black men who were killed at the hands of police. He was murdered coming out of his bachelor party. 50 shots. 50 shots went in his direction and 0 shots went in the direction of the police officers. And again, there were a lot of complexities to that, and there always are, but Sean Bell was murdered, and I wrote about it. And that was a very controversial time in my life too, because, you know, there were people telling me I had no right to talk about that. I don't know police officers, stuff like that. But I wasn't even criticizing police. Really what I was talking about was white privilege and how what happened to Sean Bell, an unarmed black young man, well-dressed, coming out of a club, being shot at 50 times. What I wrote about was how that could never happen to me, just because I'm white. Like, the police would never have that kind of visceral response to me, that kind of fear. It would never happen. I could try to get shot 50 times and it would never happen. So I wrote about it, and that was 5 years of my life, and I actually, one of the greatest honors of my life is I became close with the Bell family from that. They came to see it, and then I got involved with them, and it was a beautiful, beautiful time for me. So then I wrote a play, which was the second part of my trilogy, because at the end of that Brooklyn Quartet journey, I went through one of those DNA testing sites, and I got an email from somebody saying, "I think I know your mother." And so I met a guy who's apparently my cousin, like the first person I ever met in my life who was blood related to me. And he was first cousins to my biological mother. So I called my director of Brooklyn Quartet, and I was like, "I'm done with this play. I just found some information. I'm going to get into this. You know, this is what I have to write about. This is where I have to go with my creative expression, because my creative expression is my life. This is where I have to, like for some people, they have a diary, or they have, you know, things of that kind of nature. They go to therapy, whatever, and I've been to plenty of therapy. But for me, it's my theater work. It's my filmmaking. It's my poetry. It's my music. Like, when I'm dealing with something, I have to deal with it through my art. Otherwise, I literally feel like I might die. Like, I have to put it out there like that. And theater, like I said, I tell people sometimes it saved my life, because music, it was never really, you know, celebrated that I wanted to be out there with the things that were important to me. You know, it's like, music is not really like that anymore, unless you're a hip-hop artist, you know, I think. But talking about real things, you know, there are no Gil Scott-Herons in the world anymore. There's no Bob Dylans. There's very few artists. There are some, but that's not what pop music is, you know. And I came from a jazz background, but I wound up in the pop world, and I digress. So I wrote a play called The Red Plaid Suitcase, and it was about me exploring my biological mother, who now became a real, actual person. Like in Broke Wide Open, I created this whole story about my biological mother, who was like an angel or a ghost or God or whatever she was, because she didn't exist. She wasn't real to me. Like, you know, I had no idea about anything about her. I'd never met her. I didn't know anybody who knew her. I knew nothing at that point. And so I made it all up. Well, now I learned stuff that I found out I had been lied to about a lot of stuff. A lot of the information in that first play was just incorrect. It just wasn't real. So now I was writing about real stuff, and I met people who really knew her. Her cousin, who only knew her until she was a young kid, because she got sent away to an orphanage and then to psychiatric hospitals. And I'm not going to tell you too much, because I want you to watch the movie that I made about it. I don't want to ruin that, but I delved into that. I met all these people that knew her, and I kind of got to know her through other people, but she died, you know, and I never got to know her. I never met her, you know. So that play was supposed to open on June 12th of 2020 at the Signature Theater in New York City, but it was COVID, and so it got canceled, didn't happen. And so I adapted a screenplay, and I made a movie about it, which was kind of weird, because I had no idea what I was doing. I had never done anything like that before in my life. And so I shot it on my phone. It became an award-winning film. And I'm so proud of it. And it's based on the same story. But the play is actually way different than the movie. Like, the play was much darker than the film. And the film is no Disney feel-good hit of the year. But that play was heavy. And interesting to me, because I think I personally evolved over the development of the work, you know, like going from the play to the film, and then working on it every day, and being obviously in a very solitary existence, especially during COVID, doing everything myself. I wrote it, I shot it, I acted in it. I was the only person for all of it, except for the score. Thank you, Steve Peckman. You're a genius, you're amazing. So, yeah, that became The Center of Distance, which was a movie that was the second part of my trilogy. And then I finished that project, and I wrote what was the third and final part of the trilogy, which is called This Is the End for Me. And I initially started writing about my biological father, because nobody knows anything about him. I certainly don't, but I've never met anybody who was even remotely connected to him. I've searched, I've spent so much of my time going through this. And, I just started writing about what I felt, I guess. And, it's interesting because, I do writing and performance workshops, and I always tell people, don't ever write about what you don't know. And if you write about something that has nothing to do with you, learn it before you write about it. Like, do all the research that you can so that you know it. And now here I am writing about some person that, I don't know. So I was writing about my perspective, my point of view. And man, that went through like all kinds of crazy ups and downs and ins and outs. And so I spent 2 years filming this movie, which now I'm a filmmaker. I know what I'm doing. I'm using an actual camera. I know about things like white balance and ISO and lighting and sound and, like it's a real movie and it looks much different. But it's still the heart of Broke Wide Open, it's still connected. It's like these three stories, and it's called This Is the End for me because I wanted it to be a metaphorical death of this time in my life because I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I don't want to write about it anymore. I don't even want to think about it anymore. I've been searching and I've been looking and wondering and I've gone through all this stuff and it's been my art and it's been my real life and I don't want to do it anymore. So I wanted this movie to be the end of it. And the other heavy part about this was that I have lost some pretty close friends who have taken their own lives who are adoptees over this period of time. And so this movie is about suicide and the fine line between suicide and resilience. And, I learned along the way, ironically, from my friend Krista Victoria, who I believe took her own life, but she died a couple of years ago. She told me that adoptees are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than anybody else. And Krista had just finally written her first solo play about her adoption, and she asked me to direct it. And then like a month later, she was gone. So this movie, I wanted it to honor those who have left us. That sounds like such a trite cliche, but yeah, I wanted to honor them. And so I finished this movie, and I'm so proud of it, and it's incredible. And, the Center of Distance, you could see, it's on streaming services. Go to Tubi TV, that's my favorite place to see it. But this movie, This Is the End for me, you won't be able to see that for probably a year. It's going to navigate through the festival system, stuff like that. Festival circuit system. It's funny that an adoptee says the festival system. So now I'm done, and so last night before I went to bed, I was just kind of scrolling through YouTube in my bed before I was falling asleep. I do that sometimes, and sometimes I watch American Idol auditions because some of them are so heartwarming, and I don't know if they're true or if it's all bullshit or whatever, but I love to watch it, and I kind of suspend my disbelief and tell myself it's true, So I love watching. And last night there was a woman on who they asked her, questions about her life. And one of the questions was, does anybody else in your family have musical talent like you? Like, do people sing or play instruments or whatever? And she goes, well, actually, I was adopted, And so no, nobody in my adoptive family has any musical sensibility at all, actually. But it turns out that her biological mother was a singer-songwriter who had done 2 albums, but who had died pretty recently, I guess at 40 years old. And this girl was probably like 22 or something like that. And what happened was she auditioned. She was great. She sounded just like her mother. They had recordings of her mother, which was amazing to me. And her adoptive family was standing backstage. On American Idol, they stand back. They were with Ryan Seacrest, and they're waiting to see what happens. And she sings, and so Katy Perry and Lionel Richie and the other guy, I forget his name, they go, do you want to bring your mom out, your parents out when we, do our, give you our scores and decide on what's going to happen? She was like, yeah. Well, unbeknownst to her, and it seemed like nobody else knew, that I guess her adoptive parents had invited her biological cousins who she had connected to and aunts and uncles to come. So they were there. So it seemed like, Lionel Richie and Katy Perry and, like they didn't know. And it seemed like Ryan Seacrest didn't know, and this girl certainly didn't know. So then when they brought out her adopted parents, these other people came out as well, and this girl just crumbled because they had already had a FaceTime with each other, and they were supposed to meet like next year or something like that. But they met in that moment. And it was so heavy for me. You know, first of all, I thought to myself, like, how could you do that to her? And this, like, she's trying to get on American Idol. You know what I mean? Like, you're kind of fucking up this moment, you know? But at the same time, I just thought to myself, like, I looked at her face and it just seemed so sincere and so real. You know, it seemed like she did not know. And that it really was happening like this. And I thought to myself, wow, she's meeting, you know, these people that, and it turns out that they were musically inclined, you know, they were singers and musicians, and it just, you know, I think it was the first time for me that I thought, I'm never going to meet my biological mother or my father. And I know all these stories about them and all this stuff, and I've met people who are very close with Judith, who was my biological mother, in her later life. And so I get a kind of a pretty good sense of who she was, you know. But who she was to them was totally different than who she was to her cousin who knew her as a kid, who she was this troubled kid and, you know, a lot to deal with, and nobody could deal with her, and they sent her away. And to the people who knew her as grown up, she was like this kind, nice, beautiful spirit that everybody loved so much. And so, but all I have is these stories, you know, and I'm never going to meet her. And I just thought to myself, damn, you know, I just spent 17 years searching and going through this process. And, you know, it has been a very visceral, profound experience, to say the least. And, you know, it's cost me a lot. You know, it's cost me a lot. It's been a lot to deal with, to carry all the time. You know, it's been almost like a burden. Especially when I found out she was dead, you know. And I thought to myself, what have I gotten from all of this? You know? And then I thought, like, what difference does it make in your life if you're an adoptee or foster person? If you're somebody who didn't know, like, if you're an adoptee, it's a little bit different, because if you come out of foster care, you probably knew your parents or your mother, your father, or whoever raised you. Like, you probably knew them. But if you're an adoptee, you probably don't know them. You probably never met them. You are legally kept from them in most cases. A lot of that is changing now, but you probably don't know them. And so it's a little bit different. But I've often thought, and so people go crazy, you know, like they force people to meet them, they search for their whole lives, it just consumes their whole life, and people get very depressed off of this. You know, they feel like something is missing. There's this big hole in their chest, a hole in their life, like they just don't know who they are or where they come from or whatever, and they need that for some reason. And I went through a lot of that, you know. I went through both sides, like, I don't care. And then I went through times where I need to know. You know, like, I went through both, all of it. But now that I'm done with this 17-year journey, you know, and now I have to honor this film and put it out there, and, you know, it's going to be probably the next couple of years of promoting and dealing with it and getting it out for people to see it. It's a movie, you know. And it would be awesome to make some money off of this movie, too. But I have to think, like, and I ask the adoption community, what's the point? Like, what do we get from this? You know, what are we looking for? Like, I still, 17 years later, don't know what I was even looking for. Like, what if I met Judith, you know? So that would have been nice, but for what? You know, like, to what end? I mean, I grew up with my parents who raised me, you know, who were nice people, who I treated like crap, you know, but who were very kind, good people who gave me a beautiful home, you know, like, I don't know what I'm supposed to get from this now. And I think people have watched me over the years and they've kind of felt sorry for me, which kind of makes me want to puke in a way. And I appreciate it at the same time. But you know what I mean? It's like people, you know, I actually had this woman once say to me who I was close to, you know, she was like, you need to let this go. And I was incredibly offended by that, you know, because it was my work too. But she's like, it's your whole life. It's all you think about. Like, you got to move on. You know, it happened. You were adopted, whatever. You were separated from your biological mother at birth. You were lived in 3 foster homes. It's well documented. 6 years on one play, you know, 3 or 4 years on the second part of the trilogy. And, you know, I haven't spoken to her in a long time now, but she'd probably be very happy to know that this is the end for me. And this was a very dark, scary time for me, working on this project, being in the head of suicide and working on this and going through what I've been through personally. A lot of stuff that I haven't shared, you know, like, what's the point? You know, what's the purpose to this? You know, I don't know. I feel like the adoption community is like running around like a hamster on one of those spinning wheels, you know. And also, you get so much weird feedback and input from other people. Like somebody recently sent me a video that some scientist, you know, said that the adoption train, I don't know if you ever heard of that, but there was an adoption train where all these foster kids were, you know, sent all over the country and adopted out, and somebody, you know, like somebody thought that perhaps they were scientifically made children from cabbage. That's the kind of shit you have to deal with when you're an adoptee, when people learn that you're adopted, and then if they're, you know, the kind of people who think a little bit deeper than most people, they start coming up with these weird theories, and you know, I have dealt with so much crazy stuff dealing with this, and again, I have met some of the nicest, some of the best, absolute best people I've ever met in my life through this community, but I have also met some of the darkest, most horrific people, you know, people who I looked at them like, are you serious right now? Like, really bad. But I get it, you know, it's like when you have that kind of trauma in your body, when you have that kind of loss, that visceral, it's biological, it's blood, you know, it's DNA, it's in you. When you have that, and it's generational in many cases, it's like, and generational meaning you don't have any knowledge of your generational past by blood. And, you know, blood is a big thing to people. Hey, there's nothing like blood, you know. Blood is everything. You're my blood, you know, like, that has nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about that. And so, I'm going to end this video now, which is weird, right? Because I have there's no ending to this, you know. I had a big argument with my director in my first play because I had written like 260 endings to that play. And when I was opening off Broadway, he was like, could you finish this fucking play? You know, and I screamed at him. You know, we were going back and forth about endings. And I finally said, there is no ending. And he just looked at me and smiled. And that wound up being the ending of the play, that there are no endings. I think I just said that in a video that I just put out recently. But there are no endings, you know. And that's kind of what it feels like to be adopted. Like, there's no end. You're not going to get there, you know. Like, personally, like, I don't know what it feels like to meet the person whose body I came out of. I don't know what that feels like, and I'm never going to know what that feels like. I'm never going to know what it feels like to be biologically connected to somebody. I know one person in the world who's biologically connected to me right now, and I could not feel further from connected to that guy. As a matter of fact, you know, I hope he's not watching this, but if he is, whatever. I recently got an email from him because I sent him my film that I just finished. And he's been very kind to me. He's been very supportive, fundraisers, things like that. He's been incredibly generous to me. He actually came to where I live and met me. We had dinner with his beautiful wife. And, you know, he's an elder, though. He's like in his 80s. He's not well right now, but he's doing well. But he's fighting a disease. And I got this email from him about my latest movie. Now, anybody who knows me knows I'm a lot. Like, I'm not easy. You know, I'm not an easy person. I've had very close friends say, well, you are kind of intense, you know, and a lot of people who don't know me well, they just hate me. Like, I think my experience in my life has been either you hate me or you love me, like crazy love me, or just hate me, like you want me to be dead. There's no in between with me. You know, people, I've had people say things about me who I've literally never had a conversation with, like really strong things with conviction, and they don't know anything about me, good and bad. And it all gets back to me for some reason. So I got this email from him after he watched my film, and it was scathing. Now, I've gotten so much incredible feedback from this movie, like off the charts good. He was actually, it seemed he was offended by this film. Like, it was so dark for him. It was so scary. He said, instead of "this is the end for me," you should call it "better days ahead." And it really hurt me bad, you know. I was like, I mean, honestly, if I'm being really honest, my first response was, fuck you. Who the fuck you think you are? Like, what you're writing has nothing to do with the film. And so you can't deal with difficult subjects? And by the way, well, you know what? I don't want to ruin the movie for you. But let's just say that what he wrote, if you watch the movie, was totally inappropriate. It wasn't even smart. But then it made me think, you know, Judith, my biological mother, was sent away when she was a kid. Like, her mother died when she was, I think, 3, and her father died when she was 10. And she was sent to an orphanage, and she lived on a block in Brooklyn where her whole family lived around her. You know, there was like the whole block of her relatives, and nobody wanted to take this 10-year-old kid in. And so this guy who wrote this email to me, this scathing email, he had told me, well, you know, she was rough. You know, she was hard to deal with. I mean, she was a tough one, you know. And I'm like, she was 10. What are you talking about? So she was sent away to an orphanage and then wound up in mental institutions like psychiatric hospitals. And then she was sent to another country. And then when, you know, I met the people who knew her as an adult, and you know, they asked her, like, where's your family? Like, what's up with your family? And she said, I have no family. And the guy who was her boss later in her life, he says, what do you mean? She goes, my family's dead. He's like, what are you talking about? What, they're all dead? Like, everybody in your family's dead? Like, what, they died of the plague? You know? She's like, they're all dead. But what I realized is that they were dead to her because they turned their back on her. They just let her go. They sent her away. Nobody wanted to take care of her. Nobody thought, this girl from our family lost both of her parents. Now she's all alone in the world, and they're going to send her to an orphanage? This was in 1940, but still, who does that? What kind of family does that? So when I got that feedback from him, I thought, this family has problems dealing with difficult things, with intense situations, with hard stuff, which is what I am. I am all of that. I'm hard, I'm intense, I'm difficult. You know, I've been called a disruptive artist, which has been, and you know, the reviewer meant that in the greatest way, and I have taken it as the greatest compliment I've ever received. I am a disruptive artist. I take difficult things that people don't want to talk about, don't want to deal with, and I try to turn them into something beautiful. Like, I try to turn them into a beautiful bed of wildflowers, characters that you fall in love with, that you see yourself in, so that you're then able to kind of ingest all of that and deal with racism and white privilege and gentrification and homophobia and all the horrible things. I try to make those things beautiful in a play or in a film. But when I got this email, I realized, he's part of that family. That's why they sent her away. She was too hard to deal with, so they just sent her away. He told me another story about how, you know, somebody in that family had had a baby, and the family, you know, said, don't worry about it, we'll take care of the baby. She was a young teen, you know, and I don't even know if they knew who the father was, but when the baby was born, the baby was black, and they got rid of the baby. And that's like a deep, dark secret in the family. And the other thing that didn't get past me is when I first met this man, who, again, I'm not attacking him. He's been very nice to me and very kind. But when I first met him, he sent like an email to other people in their family. And not one person contacted me. Like, look, Judith had a child. They didn't even know I was born. They didn't even know she had had a baby. And he goes, look at this. Judith had a baby. He's one of us. He's our blood. He's our family. He's our cousin. Nobody contacted me, not one person. And I actually reached out to one other person in that family because I found out that somebody like a cousin of his, or I don't know, a niece maybe or something like that, she was in the music business, and I was in the music business for many years, and I reached out to her, and I was strongly rejected. Like, I told her who I was, that Judith was my mother, and she wrote back to me and said something like, I have to process this or whatever, and then that was it. I didn't hear from her. I reached out again. She didn't get back. She just never got back to me, just completely rejected me. So, yeah, at the end of all this, at the end of this trilogy, I realized, after watching that thing on American Idol last night, I just thought, I ain't going to have that kind of response from a family. This girl, these people came out on the stage after she sang, and it was all hugs and, like so much love. It was just pure love. And her adoptive parents were standing there, and it was just love all around. It was so beautiful. Her adoptive parents brought them to her. I just know that after 17 years, I don't know. What did I just do? You know what I mean? Like, I made some great art. I had a great experience along the way. I grew as an artist. It's like I feel like this experience is where I grew up and became who I am, really. But, I suffered a lot too, and I struggled a lot, and it's not exactly the biggest money-making venture to do this kind of work, you know what I mean? Like, this is not blockbuster hit kind of material. And it's hard, difficult, and I've often been asked, like, you're so talented, you're so gifted, why don't you write about other things so it's more commercial, like, so you can make more money? And I'm just like, I'm the kind of artist that writes about what compels me, And so my own personal story has always compelled me, and racism and oppression and any form of prejudice. These are the things that I write about. Not exactly Disney material. So anyway, for the adoption community, my heart is with you. I understand. I certainly have learned over the years how unbelievably difficult it had to have been to be separated from your child against your will, like in Philomena as a child. When I watched the movie Philomena, that's when I realized that I had been lied to about everything. I understand how it feels, adoptees, to have your information withheld from you by law. Like, you can't get your own birth certificate. You can't get, like, questions answered. You can't get anything. You have to fight for everything that's yours, that you should have, Transracial adoptions, my friend April Dinwiddie, who's like a superhero, if you're a person of color and you're adopted into a white family, they have no idea about your culture. I understand the complexity of how crazy that must be, and how you got to go to school and you're black and you don't even know what that means because you've grown up with a white family in a white neighborhood around white people, and they're teaching you maybe about your ancestors from Sudan or something like that, but they ain't teaching you about being black in America here, because they can't. How can they? I understand all of the complexities of all of this stuff. When you are curious as a kid, like when I asked questions as a kid, I had people saying to me, oh man, you're so ungrateful, you're so disrespectful. How dare you ask questions like that? Not by my parents. My parents were amazing. My mother, actually, when I told her I was going to search for my biological mother, she was like, oh my God, can I help? Like, they were beautiful about it. And I don't know what they knew and if they withheld things from me or not. Like, I have no idea. I just know that they were beautiful people who tried their best every day. They were loving, good people who did the best they could. That's all I know about them. That's the best of being a human being. So to the adoption community, I understand all of it. I've learned so much in the last 17 years from you, from all of you. I did a show in New York City when I was running off Broadway where there was an adoption conference at St. John's University, and they literally bought out the whole theater. The theater was filled with people from that conference that night, and I have to say it was one of the most beautiful nights of my life. And I met some of the most amazing people that night, and I'm still in contact with them to this day. And that was many years ago. That was now 12 years ago or something like that, 11, 12 years ago. Like, I've learned so much from this community. But I've also learned that we're all different. Everybody feels different. Everybody has their own experience, and everybody, you know, has their own people who raise them. They deal with them differently. Like, adoption is not a monolith. You know, it's not all the same. Adoption does not equal child trafficking like a lot of people feel, you know. It's not only about, you know, people having fertility issues. It ain't about that. It's not just business. Not for everybody. For a lot of people, yes, but not for everybody. And I'm not even willing to say it's the majority, but I have no idea. I do know that adoption is a dirty business, you know, and I was a result of that, you know. I came from Louise Wise, the dirtiest adoption agency in history. They were all going to jail, you know. There was a documentary made about them. They were disgusting what they did. Horrific to me and to other people. So yeah, I do understand, and I'm a result of that too. But I'm also the kind of person that, you know, like, I feel like everybody has a right to change, and there are always so many different stories. Like, you know, one thing a good friend of mine who lived to be 101 years old said to me once was, you know, you have no idea about anything. Like, keep that in mind as you're living your life. You just stay open, because, you know, don't judge people, because you have no idea. You don't know. All you know is what you know, what you have experienced yourself, and what you feel is totally fine. But don't impose that on other people, and that's what a lot of people in the adoption community do. Like I said, I've had people be cruel to me, but I've had death threats. But I've also met some of the most solid people I've ever known. And I do understand the pain of this. And for me, this is the end for me. You know, it ends here, you know, with these 3 projects, and I really look forward to working on other things now. But I know that, you know, even though I'm done with it creatively, I'll never be done with this, because I'm never going to know. Like, none of my questions are going to be answered, ever. I will never get to talk to the person who made me, you know? I'm never going to know that. And the thing is, yeah, plenty of people lose people in their lives. Plenty of people lose their mothers, lose their fathers, lose their brothers, their sisters. Loss is so profound. But the thing is, when you're a baby that was separated from a mother at birth, probably against her will, because that is, the narrative might be different, but that's what usually happens. It's usually a life-altering experience for the mother. I mean, just think about it. Like, you know, you're being extracted from your child. In my case, my biological mother, Judith, had mental illness. She had some problems. But she was also a brilliant, beautiful, creative, funny, engaging woman, from what I've been told by adults who knew her for 25 years, 27 years, till she died. The guy who she worked for actually made her funeral. He sat Shiva for her for 2 weeks. He closed his office. Like, he loved her. His family loved her. His kids loved her. All the people that worked with her loved her. The doorman of their building loved her. I talked to him for 2 hours one day. I'll never meet her, you know. I'll never have any real information about her that she could tell me. I'll never know what happened. I found out that she was looking for me. All the years that I was looking for her, she was looking for me. And we were kept from one another by Louise Wise. That I know is a fact. So, creatively, this is the end for me. But, you know, to the adoption community, I just say, yeah, it's hard for us, because, you know, in most cases, we ain't never going to know any of what we want to know, you know. But I also ask the question, what if you do learn? There are plenty of people who have met their people, who have learned, who have gotten all the information they've been looking for. So what does that mean? Who cares? You know what I mean? Like, what difference does it make? You know, I'm sure for some people it makes them so happy and they feel a sense of closure. I guess that maybe that's part of the reason that I've never believed in closure as a thing. Like, I feel like our lives are just an accumulation of every day and every person that we've ever met and every place that we've ever been. Like, that's what life is. There's no closure. There's none of that. You know, I don't believe that. I think everything is just an experience, you know, relationships, everything, experiences. We just keep moving along in our life, carrying all this stuff with us, and it makes us who we are. And so if you are an adoptee who got all this information, did it make your life better or did it make your life worse? You know, what did it do? Did it do nothing? Like for me, I think it probably would have done nothing. I mean, it would have been nice. I would have loved to have met her. That would have been cool, you know, but whatever, you know what I mean? Like what I got out of these 17 years was amazing creatively and I guess spiritually in many ways. Yeah, I think that's something I have to work out for the rest of my life. You know, like what did I get out of this spiritually? Because to me, that's the most important thing. You know, what did I get out of this? What? You know, what was it for? Certainly didn't change my life financially, that's for sure. So, you know, and I've had people say, oh my God, you're a genius, you're unbelievable. You know, I know what I could do on stage. I know how I can write. I know all of this. I know I'm a good storyteller. I know I'm all of that. But even if I became rich and famous from this, I don't know what I would have gotten from it other than that, you know, and that has been something that's never been a big priority for me anyway. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. So I hope you'll go to Tubi TV and watch The Center of Distance, which was part 2. Broke Wide Open was part 1. It's undocumented. I never let anybody record it. You could buy the script. It's at Amazon and different places. You could read it. It's kind of unedited. You know, I gave it to somebody before it was really finished, but I actually love that. I love going back to it and seeing where I was at that time in my life and my creative practice, and I was kind of raw at that point. So I kind of like that, you know, and it shows me the progression from there to The Center of Distance and now to This Is the End for Me. I hope you watch this when it's available to the public in about a year probably, or there'll be screenings that you'll be able to come to along the way if you know, happen to be where I screen it. But yeah, if you were somebody who supported me all these years during this journey, I adore you, and I appreciate you so much, you know, and I live in so much gratitude all the time. And, you know, ain't no bullshit about me. Like, I really feel that way. And I know a lot of people out there, you know, like, I struggle with the entertainment business, you know what I mean? Because everything we do is always, you know, kind of scrutinized as what's the angle, you know what I mean? Like, somebody once even said to me, that's so cool that you got that adoption angle for your work, you know? And I'm like, what are you talking about? You know, for me, my creative practice is my lifeblood, you know what I mean? It's like, it is the most important thing in my life. It's what I do. I don't have family. I'm not, you know, I'm by myself. Like, this is what I do, is what I love. And so, yeah, it's everything. It's all of it, just like life. It's the good and the not so good. You know, it's the difficult. It's the magnificent, and it's the, you know, the unspeakable. It's all of it. And I accept that, you know. I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm kind of intense like that, you know. A friend of mine recently decided to not speak to me anymore because of that. She was like, I think she thinks I'm toxic. That's why I was disappointed to get that email from that guy, my cousin, my blood cousin, because I could tell that he felt like I was toxic. So, and that's also part of the reason I felt invisible most of my life, because I've always been very reticent to share my deepest thoughts with anybody outside of my art, because people go away, because I am so intense, you know, and I'm not going to change that. I like that about me. I love who I am, but it's a solitary existence because of that. So, yeah, I was very disappointed, and, you know, that made me think, like, okay, this guy's blood, and he can't handle me. Like, what difference does it make? You know what I mean? Blood or not. Whatever. So, I'm going to shut up now. For the film people, if you're still here, the cool thing about shooting in 1080 is the Panasonic S5 allows me to shoot unlimited. If I was shooting this in 4K, this would have cut off a long time ago. So I'm glad I shot in 1080. That's part of the reason I did it. And for everybody else who's still here, I so appreciate you listening to all these words. I don't know what it all means, but I guess in a kind of sort of way, this is me saying thank you for the last 17 years, for the support, for the love, for the encouragement, for showing up for me. You know, I sold out every one-off show that I did doing Broke Wide Open for 6 years, and then Brooklyn Quartet. Like, I sold out every show, every one-off in New York City for 10 straight years. I sold out all over the country doing my little tours where I was developing my work. People would show up in all these other cities, London, like, unbelievable. Like, thank you so much for that. You know, I love you for that. You know, you filled my heart all the time. You know, I can't explain how much I appreciate that, and I don't take it for granted. You know, and because the way I feel, if you love an artist, you watch their work, you read their work, you go see their work. If you love them, especially if they've been doing it for years and years and years, because that's who they are. And so I really appreciate that. So thank you so much. And I'm going to get out of here now because I've been sitting for too long and my hip is kind of bothering me. So yeah, this is the end for me, and see what happens tomorrow. All right, that's it.